the part that I wanted to get into, though, is certifying the supply chain, because you can have a farmer, and this is my conundrum now, is we have these farmers that are doing awesome work in their vineyard, that aren't doing no-till, that are working on regenerative organic, that are pushing towards biodynamics. They're doing all of the right stuff in their vineyards, and they're sequestering carbon. And then I go and pick up their wine in a diesel truck and ship it to a warehouse that's running refrigeration off grid electricity, and then ship it again in another diesel truck down to California, and then another warehouse, and then another truck to get it to a final consumer, or actually not even a final consumer, because then it's going to a wine shop that will possibly ship it again. So every time we put that bottle in another box or on another truck, we're just adding this to our carbon footprint and taking away from the hard work that the vineyards are doing already.
Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Organic Wine Podcast featuring James Endicott of Vinocity Selections. I'm your host and creator, coming to you from Los Angeles, Adam Huss. James Endicott created Vinocity Selections with his partners to leverage wine to tackle climate change by revolutionizing the supply chain. Vinocity Selections is a wine importing, distribution, and retail hub, all in one. The Vinocity Selections website, vinocityselections.com, makes it clear that this company begins with agriculture, specifically viticulture that is, quote, beyond organic. It makes the bold claim that agriculture is the climate solution, wine is our first step. And James accomplishes this by curating and promoting a client list of wine producers who make wine from regeneratively farmed vineyards as a first step. The big problems he is trying to solve, and that are relevant to everyone in wine, is how to create a supply chain that protects and enhances the good work that these producers are doing in the vineyard. I think you'll really enjoy this conversation because James cares so deeply about the problems he's trying to solve, and we went deep into some of the big questions facing the wine industry. Also, I want to give a special thanks to Lisa Bauer of Yamakiri Wines. She introduced me to James, and this episode wouldn't have been possible without her generous spirit. You can hear my interview with Lisa on episode 24. Enjoy! James, thanks for coming on the Organic Wine Podcast. How are you?
I'm terrific. Thanks for having me on.
Could you start by just introducing yourself and your company in any way that you'd like?
Yeah, we're a little tiny, we're a small wine importer and distributor here in California and in New York City. We've been around for about 3.5 years. Actually, no.
What are you called?
Vinocity. I'm sorry. Vinocity Selections. That's my company. I started about 3 years ago. Actually, no. Yeah, that was it. I started 3 years ago.
Okay.
It was, I moved out here to California from New York and worked for another importer and distributor, and I didn't jive with the ethos of the company or the wines, but they got me to California, which was a big goal for me. I love the weather. I've been in New York for 15 years and just was tired of winters. But I also wanted to be closer to the wine production. And there's something special about California. A friend of mine, he described it as the Wild West of wine. And what he meant by that is you can have all these crazy licenses. In no other state is it legal to import and be a distributor and to have a direct-to-consumer retail license. It's pretty close to vertical integration in this business, and it's impossible.
And you have, Vinocity has all of that, right?
Correct. But it was...
Yeah, at first I thought you were just...
moved. Go ahead.
Yeah. It was one of the unique things about Vinocity that I realized after, looking more into it. At first I just thought it was distribution. Then it's like, wait, this is a retail shop as well. And then clearly you have imported wine. So all of that all together, it's very cool.
It's
thing, but
the only really available in California to be vertically integrated like that. And so I moved out here to start this company. In the back of my head, even though I worked for another one, it was always a stepping stone to my own importer. And the only reason I wanted to do it myself is no one else had the same value system that I did at least 3 or 4 or 5 years ago.
And that's the part that I think it wasn't that you just wanted to move to California because you could circumvent the other state laws. I think you had a real ethos about wine that I think we share, and I think that's why you're
Well,
here. That's why I wanted to talk to you.
it's
If you-
the ethos is formed over many years, and really found its true footing about 2 years ago. I had already started Vinocity, and I knew I wanted to work with organic and biodynamic producers, but I didn't make the connection between organics and biodynamics and climate. And sometime about 3 years ago, maybe four, right about when I was considering Vinocity, when I was considering creating this company, um, I was at a real conundrum. Do I start a wine company that continues to operate in the same way that all the other wine companies do, and then creates this massive carbon footprint through shipping and through bottling and through all the different things that we do in our industry? Do I just keep playing by the same rules? And I kind of had a little bit of a crisis. I didn't know if I wanted to even stay in the wine business. I thought maybe just leave entirely and try to find a job in climate. I had
Mhm.
realized about 4 or 5 years ago that climate breakdown is actually happening in real time around us. And I've got a sense of urgency, a new sense of urgency about how we find solutions to the coming catastrophe. And they're not really solutions for today. They're not solutions for our lifetime, even. They're solutions for our grandkids. And so
Mhm.
when I started to think about things on that time frame, um, it seemed like a good time to go ahead and start a company based on these principles that maybe climate solutions should be part of the foundation of whatever new companies we build from now on. So I stayed in wine. It took a lot of back and forth, and I did a lot of soul searching and had some revelatory moments where I realized that in the wine business we really have this crazy access point to wealth and financial excess that you don't have in other agricultural industries. And I had worked in some of the best restaurants in the world and sold incredible wines with these gargantuan price tags. And they open a conversation with the 1% that coming from Oklahoma. I never had the opportunity to rub shoulders or elbows with the 1% on the level that I did working in New York fine dining. And so here I am
Yeah.
in fine dining, and you've got these opportunities to communicate a story to the 1% who have the money and have the opportunity to make changes on a vast level. And I started to make that connection. Like wine is our access point to real ability to make change. And it may not be me making the change, someone else, but it's creating that dialogue and creating the conversation. And I guess what the conversation that I'm thinking about is that climate solutions are completely intertwined with agriculture. And we don't get out of our climate uh, crisis without completely rethinking our agricultural systems. Like we've been pulling carbon out of the ground for 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, but we haven't been putting it back. And until we start putting it back in the ground, we're not going to get to the equilibrium where our grandkids are going to be able to go snow skiing. Right? I want
Yeah.
my if I have grandkids, I want them to enjoy snow skiing. That would be stinking awesome, but it's not going to happen unless and I really don't think it's going to happen. But there may be on the outside chance if we converted half of the world's agriculture to regenerative um, or regenerative organic. If we could add, say, 5% organic matter to 50% of the world's agricultural land, basically we hit climate reset. Like I
Yeah.
started to think in those numbers. Like if
Yeah.
if there's weight to carbon, um, one if 1% of carbon in the soil is worth 10,000 pounds of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, then you start to do the math. It took a little bit, but if you take half of the world's agricultural land, which is about 2 billion acres, and you add 5% organic matter at 10,000 pounds an acre, you can get pretty close to the 600 gigatons of carbon we've added to the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
It takes a lot. And how do you start to make changes on that much agricultural land? And
Yeah.
that's where I kept coming back to wine. It's a tiny piece of the puzzle as far as agricultural land goes. It's less than 1% of all of the arable land in the world. However, it's got this outsized voice, especially in the dining halls of New York and San Francisco and Europe, where people have the wherewithal to make changes on land on that level. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's where I started. I wanted this to be I wanted Vinocity to be a support for farmers that are doing the farming that I think we need to do to successfully accomplish this goal of climate remediation or carbon remediation from the atmosphere, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it.
Yeah.
Um,
When I checked out your website for the first time, I was just sort of blown away. Like I was, it's rare that you see a wine distributor or wine retail shop where like one of the main, besides the wine sale page for the, the retail sales, the online sales, the next biggest thing that you can find is the Beyond Organic page on the Vinocity website. And it's all about what you just said. It's all about how it begins with the farming. It's really like, what you're doing is promoting agriculture, a certain kind of agriculture that benefits the world rather than destroys it. And of course, that's where I jived and thought this was amazing and wanted to be part of it, and wanted to talk to you and help promote that. I mean, I think just to feed on what you were saying, like how do we get to 2 billion acres? I mean, I think it takes all of us like working together. I think you can't do it yourself. We can
Certainly not.
touch, right,
I,
you can touch people, but that's exactly what you're doing. You're trying to touch as many people as you can. I'm trying to reach out to as many people as I can and promote
well,
that idea and how important it is.
at the time that I started on this little project, my thought was 2 billion acres of land. I think we've increased it to like 3.5 billion acres that we need to do this on.
Oh
Um,
well.
but my thought was, how do you do this? I've got access to maybe 40 acres in Oklahoma that I could potentially run some kind of carbon sequestration experiment on. And 40 acres, if I did it correctly, I could offset most of my life's carbon footprint. But
Yeah.
it's really small considering the weight of the world. So um,
I've
how,
actually heard more encouraging numbers than some of the ones you've thrown around. I mean, you're
I'm
probably,
pretty pessimistic in my numbers,
yeah, yeah.
and
Those
I
are super conservative numbers.
they're
I've heard like much more like if to really to just start things rolling back. It's a much smaller amount of organic matter that we need to add to soils and carbon that we need to sequester before we, because it starts heading in the right direction at a lower threshold than half of the
absolutely,
agricultural land. It might
absolutely it
not
does.
solve the
And
problems right away, but at least it stops the problems
I
from continuing.
I was very pessimistic in my numbers. Um, and I was on purpose. I don't
Yeah,
think that, I feel like a lot of the climate literature out there gives us like these dire scenarios, and those dire scenarios are based on they're based on like fantasy math in a lot of respects. When I was thinking about how to move the needle on that much agricultural land, it really became this thing. You can't do it altruistically. I can't even if I were per se in the French Laundry 7 nights a week talking to the wealthiest people in the world and they wanted to help do this. It's not an altruistic endeavor for them. Altruism runs out. It has to be some kind of economic model. And as much as
yeah,
I rail against capitalism, I also recognize that we're in this system. And as long as we're in the system, people have to feed themselves and their families, and they want to send their kids to college. So there has to be an economic incentive to get farmers to actually do this kind of farming. And that
Well,
was
it's
when I started thinking about a certification stamp. And my
mm,
original plan was we would start a certification stamp called CO2 neg that is actually certification of farming, but there are plenty of people out there that certify farmers, and I didn't want to be one of those. So we would piggyback off somebody else's farming certifications, like Demeter, who does biodynamic certification, or like the Rodale Institute, who has now their organic or the regenerative organic
yeah, the ROC,
certification,
yeah.
which are which are certifications that have soil health at their foundation.
Yep.
So if we could piggyback on one of those, the part that I wanted to get into though is certifying the supply chain, because it you can have a farmer, and this is my conundrum now is we have these farmers that are doing awesome work in their vineyard, that aren't doing no-till, that are working on regenerative organic, that are pushing towards biodynamics, that are doing all of the right stuff in their vineyards, and they're sequestering carbon, and they're one guy's even growing a zola on his water, on his pond, which is sequestering like 3 tons of carbon per acre on freshwater. Like there are all these techniques that they're working, and then I go and pick up their wine in a diesel truck and ship it to a warehouse that's running refrigeration off grid electricity, and then ship it again in another diesel truck down to California, and then another warehouse, and then another truck to get it to a final consumer, or actually not even a final consumer, because then it's going to a wine shop that will possibly ship it again. So every time we put that bottle in another box or on another truck, we're just adding this to our carbon footprint and taking away from the hard work that the vineyards are doing already. And
Right.
that fixing the supply chain was foremost in my thought, because I can support all the farmers I want, but if I'm just polluting on the back end, I'm not doing any good for anybody. So that's where we're at now, is working on supply chain. Originally, I thought we'd move to electric vehicles. I've got our names on all of the truck lists for a Tesla Class 8 semi. I've got our name on the Zos, which used to be called Thor. I've got I've placed the deposits for these electric trucks, and I'm waiting. But it's been years, and it's going to be more years, because there are plenty of huge players in the industry, like Amazon, that will have 100,000 trucks before I ever get my name on the list.
Right.
You know, so there's that with electric trucks. Then there's the buying a new vehicle, or actually just buying anything new, has a carbon weight to every dollar you spend, and especially a new vehicle like a Tesla, who has rare earth metals and a ton of heat that goes into the construction of that vehicle. You're creating a giant carbon deficit just in the purchase of this new vehicle. And then you're running the vehicle on grid electricity, which is still 40% from coal. You're still adding to the problem. You're making it, maybe you're not adding as much as you were driving diesel trucks, but you're still adding to the problem. So then you just keep going backwards. The problem's huge. And to get out of it, it takes a lot of thought. So right
Well,
now we picked up a 2003 Ford Power Stroke diesel engine, an old it's an old people mover, like a shuttle bus from a church, and
okay.
we're going to convert that over to run on waste vegetable oil, which was all the rage about 10 or 15 years ago. I'm very late to the game here.
Right.
We'll
Right.
we'll pick up the goal here is we close the loops on our supply chain, so that when we deliver to our restaurants, we can pick up their waste products. The overall arching goal here, I'm getting really far afield. I know you can re- redirect me, but the overarching goal is to create a carbon-free um, supply chain. We'll run this truck on vegetable oil that is not fossil fuel. It's still combustion, but all of the carbon from vegetable oil comes out of the atmosphere and not out of the ground. So we're just returning atmospheric carbon back, but it's seen as a carbon negative technology because the growing and the creation of that oil is has carbon byproducts that are then hopefully composted. The goal is that we'll someday maybe even make our own oil. Right
Right.
now, we're going to pick it up from the restaurants that we work with and sell wine to. So when we deliver their wine, we'll pump out their waste vegetable oil and return that to our warehouse where it rectifies and settles out, and then we can use it as fuel for our now fossil fuel free truck. The warehouse itself, we don't have yet. So this is where we're running into, there's financial hurdles that we're still trying to figure out. A warehouse in South Central LA is kind of the goal. We'd love to. I've seen a couple places. The idea is space enough for us to store all of our wine, cut the grid ties so that we can start creating our own electricity for said warehouse. To
Yeah.
to keep a warehouse off the grid, or to keep a warehouse cool enough to store wine, we need to there's going to be some retrofitting. We want to do earthen buttresses up the
Hmm.
sides of the warehouse, so we
Yeah.
can actually use those earthen buttressed sides as planting area for an urban garden. The
Oh,
So the warehouse, in my mind, the warehouse is kind of a catch-all.
that sounds
It
great.
it
Yeah.
it stores our wine. It also stores wine. Hopefully, I've talked to Roni about this at Roni Selects. My goal is that we carry we handle the wine for a lot of small distributors like us that have uh, similarly oriented values. And the
Yeah.
goal is that we get us all off of fossil fuels. And in a warehouse, to do that, I need more than just my wine, because we can't pay the overhead on a warehouse for my small company, Vinocity. So it would take
Right.
several small distributors like us, and then um, so the warehouse is in South Central. It's got about 3 times as much exterior uh, parking space than it does interior warehouse space. All of that parking is not needed. We only need 2 loading docks for the logistics that I plan to run out of this warehouse. Outside of those 2 loading docks, every bit of external space we're going to turn into an urban garden. And I would like
Yeah.
to see it an actual working farm. Like, my goal is that we provide jobs and training for people in regenerative agriculture skills in an urban setting that they can then go and apply on their own land, or way down the road. I would love to have a lending program through our Vinocity. My goal is that we have a parent company. The parent company is called the Convergence Corporation. We have a nonprofit already called Convergence Foundation that I don't do anything with, but it's going to be for regenerative urban regenerative agriculture education. Um,
He signed me up. That's kind of what I'm doing
that's
right
that's
now. Not kind of.
that's
That's exactly what I'm doing.
That's awesome, because we're not doing it yet. It's still, it's on the 10-year plan. The whole vision is a 25-year plan now to get to a fully carbon negative system, including, but to do that, we also become your trash guy. When we deliver to a restaurant, we pick up their waste oil. The truck that I envision in the future also picks up compost and returns it to our warehouse where we have our gardens. If the gardens get overflowed, or once the gardens are full of compost and we can't take any more, then we find another local farm that we can partner with. But the goal is we're constantly closing the loop on our logistics. I don't want to send a truck to a winery without delivering, to pick up wine from, like, if I want to, I don't ever want to send a truck to the Beckhams to pick up their wine without delivering something that they need on their property. So
Hmm.
if I can deliver 3 pallets of finished compost when I pick up their wine, my truck's not running empty.
Right.
The idea of empty trucks is anathema to a sustainable system. And I really
Yeah.
think about the entire system that I'm trying, the logistics, the creation of the product, meaning the wine, all the way to the consumer. If you think about the entire thing as one unit instead of separating out the warehousing, separating out the farming, start to think of it as a almost like a living cell, and
Yeah.
you're moving raw materials around in a cell. Once you
Right.
start to really think about it on a cellular level, then like there's no wasted energy in your cell.
Right.
Like when you're delivering APT to one side of the cell, the delivery system either goes back to the other side of your cell with some new product, or it gets broken down and reused.
Right.
There's no weight. The waste products are constantly being recycled inside the space, and that's it. I Once you start working with Vinocity, it's not there yet. When the truck is up and running, this is the next step. Is when you're working with us, we're your trash man, and we're also the supplier of nutrition to farms that we work with. So we're constantly running our trucks full, hopefully reducing waste throughout the process. Um, the warehouse that I see in South Central, there's a place that I've looked at that I just love. It's got enough outdoor space to put in a plastic beetle. I don't know if you're aware of Scarab Tech, but they do a pyrolysis machine that superheats plastic and breaks it down into its component parts, meaning you get propane, which
Wow.
propane is fossil fuel, it's creating more carbon in the atmosphere. But if you let your
If you trap
plastics
it.
go into the ocean, they
Yeah.
just break down into carbon and nitrous oxide anyway. Nitrous oxide's a way worse atmospheric greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
So there's we're in these huge uh, problems that
Can you
even
trap that gas that the
I,
beetle
you can trap
produces?
that gas. They're right now they're using it for heating. They use it as an
Yeah,
electric
that's what I was
generator.
thinking.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
the
could.
Scarab Tech is basically working right now to replace diesel generators,
Right.
and
I mean,
that's
not that you would need heating in a warehouse per se, but maybe the office's part, or you could
but you need
you could even just
you need
generate
air conditioning.
electricity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
you
need
need
AC. And if you can
yeah.
start to sequester another waste stream, like the plastic waste stream, it's, what is it, 400 million tons of plastic a year that we're producing and just throwing away.
Yeah.
So, that's the next big, carbon's the big one. And then the next big one is going to be, what do we do with all this goddamn plastic? If you can
Yeah.
break it down and turn it into energy with a smaller carbon footprint than letting it break down in the ocean, then do it. And we all like, well, anyway, that's Scarab Tech. That's a $30,000 machine right now, which I have every intention of owning one someday.
That sounds great. Well, what role does promoting local consumption of wine? I mean, I know there's always going to be trucks because you can't farm at the scale necessary within an urban setting. But so you're gonna you're gonna have your separation of rural and urban to some degree,
Totally.
but you could certainly cut down on you know imported wine or let's say Washington wine coming to Southern California. As much as I love Washington wines,
That's
um, what to what degree should should we all just be drinking from kegs that were grown in the suburbs?
I love it. I love the locavore, eat eat and drink what's produced locally. I love that ethos, but it's not where we're at.
No,
And I'm not. You can preach that all you want, but people are
right?
still going to go to Drago Centro downtown and
Yeah,
spend $300 on a bottle of Barolo. They're going to do
yeah,
it every night.
yeah,
So rather than change, you know, I can tell all the Oklahomans I know that if you stop eating meat, it's going to make you healthier and it'll be great for the climate. Nobody's doing it. You
Yeah.
know, you
Right.
people have we all have our desires, and I don't think that we're going to change human behavior. So what I'd really like to do is find a way to allow us to have these human desires, but to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the planet. That's really, maybe it's not possible. It's arguable that it's possible, but if you continually recycle and continually close the loops on waste and energy, I think we can get pretty close.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, f- so you represent several producers and projects. What are the requirements that you have for those people? For a winery.
I so I look for a couple things. First off, we taste the wines. I really like the natural wine ethos, but there's also a lot of I feel like there's a lot of wine that has flaws that I don't appreciate, and I kind of grew up with a palate. I grew up in these restaurants, and I say grew up. My palate and my wine education
Started slinging
matured.
wine at the age of 2
They,
in
those,
Manhattan.
those matured when I was in my 20s and early 30s in Manhattan, selling like classic wines. We sold a lot of old Bordeaux. We sold great
Hmm.
Burgundy. I had a palate that got attuned to classic representations of classic regions. I love a Barolo that tastes like a Barolo. I love,
Mm.
a Gevrey Chambertin that tastes like a Gevrey Chambertin.
So
The
you
so
like natural wines,
so
but you
I
want
like the ethos of
natural wines
natural
that
wine,
actually right,
but
that
my
are
palate,
clean
yeah,
and yeah,
exactly. My palate's classically trained, but I like the ethos of natural wines, and sometimes they don't always link up. There are a lot of natural wines out there that are delicious, but they don't have those classic flavors, the classic fruit and acid balance. There's sometimes some bacterial issues in those wines that I don't always appreciate. Other people might, but it's not my palate. So we taste everything first. If the wine feels classic or in that kind of in between classic and natural, because I really the natural wines I feel like have a lot of texture and life to them that chemically induced wines certainly don't. Um, we check out their farming. I try to watch vineyards on Google Earth to see if they've been tilling. I Some of my vineyards do till every year, some of them don't. Um, my goal is that we move everyone to no till.
yeah,
It's not a immediate proposition. I'm just a wino from Oklahoma who's never been a farmer. So for me to ask a farmer to change the way that they work is a really presumptuous
yeah,
and it's just frowned on. I feel like I'm not a professional. So for me to tell you how to run your business is rough. So I find people that share a similar value proposition that carbon sequestration is probably the most important thing we can be doing right now, more important even than making the wines, because 40 years from now all of our classic regions are going to be too hot to create classic wines. We're going to be seeing more and more champagne coming out of, or more and more sparkling wine coming from England. We're going to see more and more great Pinot Noir coming out of Canada. And the places that we've grown to love, like Côte Rôtie and Burgundy, are going to become, excessively hot for what we do. So this climate thing is literally going to change the face of my industry, whether we like it or not. So we better
yeah.
start working on it. Anyway,
So
I'm still trying to talk about what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for people
yeah,
that are baseline, no sides, no pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, except I say that everybody damn near uses copper sulfate Bordeaux mixture, especially in Italy where they have more mildew pressure.
mhm,
Um, that said, I try to convince them, and I've gotten to some extent a little bit of success. I've been trying to get my Italians to use less Bordeaux mixture, or maybe even completely stop it on a portion of their vineyard, and instead of using Bordeaux mixture, uh, try to
Like
propagate mycelium in their soil that will help fight against powdery mildew. It's possible. It just takes years of effort to do this. It's changing vineyards that have been farmed one way for sometimes 30 years to say, oh, we need you to do it this way now. It's, like I said, it's a big ask. So I'm asking my producers at the bare minimum, we work. So I said no sides. What I really mean is practicing organics. We don't use any artificial fertilizers, no inorganic fertilizers. Manure, compost are kind of the way to go. And let's see, when I look for producers, and I really haven't looked for producers in a year or so, because I don't want to grow the book without getting better. Like we can continue to grow, but if we're just growing for growing's sake, but we aren't improving our practices, then we're just continually making the climate problem worse. So I haven't pushed to grow the book very much in the last couple of years because I've been trying to figure out how to make our business better instead of bigger, if that makes any sense at all.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so I think we're at a place where we can see some actual improvement in supply chain that are really close at hand. And because of that, the company as a whole has started to taste again. We're thinking about growing some of our domestic production or producers because we might be able to ship them without fossil fuel. And
I
then
love that.
that's,
I I mean, I think you bring this up on the website, but I just pointing out, one of the upside, the sort of is that it's a win-win when you adopt a lot of these practices that you're encouraging in the wine anyway. You end up with arguably better wine, all things being equal, because it's inextricable. If you have a healthy soil, you're going to have a healthier plant.
I
And
just think of living soil as being
yeah,
if you've got living soil, then all the microbes in the soil are creating terroir in your wine. And
yeah.
I think that I've heard some classicists argue against this, but it's not. It's just patently not true. Like if you have more microbial action on your roots, then you have more mineralization of the rocks around the roots the microbes are breaking down those rocks, literally creating the terroir that's feeding into the roots that are uptaking the nutrients into the grapes. So the more life you have in the vineyard, the more soil life you have, the more terroir you have.
Can
They
Let me
plant,
propose a question for you,
yeah.
and this ties into something else I was going to ask you about. The first part of this question is, why do we care about terroir? Like, is it really? Do we really? I mean, like, why is that the mark, or the target that we're aiming for? And is that the right word for it? Is it something else? Is it something about an energy and a living aliveness, a vibrancy or something? Is there, what I mean? Like,
I,
because terroir is like, if we can taste dirt and, wildfire and
right.
like, dust in our wine, like, and, terroir in California can be sand and, raisins, and it's not necessarily
Totally.
what. So it's like, and I've been wrestling with this idea of really, I think there's an alchemy that we're shooting for, not really terroir, but it's something about pulling the essential elements out of a place and time without altering it, but not just reflecting it like in a mirror, but you're transmuting it. You're like somehow transforming, and it's undergoing this sort of alchemy that becomes this thing that is
Well,
beautiful and ineffable. Um, I don't know. So those are
well,
my
I
thoughts,
mean,
but I'll
alchemy
turn it
is
on you.
I mean, why is terroir that thing? 300 years of marketing. The French were brilliant,
Exactly right.
right? Like
Exactly.
the French have
Yeah.
brilliantly
Right.
defined every space
It's
that they
it's a
create.
I think
And
at this point it's a real estate marketing device for sure. In terms of
yeah,
the value per square foot of some of these places is all about
absolutely.
terroir.
And and you know, does Pinot Noir need X amount of minerals to be, you know, the most Pinot Noir? Like, is,
Right.
so is your Pinot um, from Burgundy or your Pinot from Oregon? Are they do they taste similar because they have the each have the same microbial balance underground that are pulling out the correct amount of minerals to that feed the Pinot Noir to its pinnacle of Pinot Noirness, or are those microbes skewing their mineral choices based on the soil? I think is
Hmm.
like it's a hard question for me to derive right now, but the does the microbial population derive terroir, or is it the soil, or is it the rocks and the minerality that those
Mm,
microbes live off of? So if
right.
I think about the microbial population as the sheath between the root and the rock, and that
Yeah.
population is it stable because of the rocks, or is it stable because of the roots? And if it's stable because of the roots, then does it just pull out all of the minerals that those roots need? Or if it's stable because of the rocks, does it pick out all the minerals it can, and then the roots uptake those minerals regardless? Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah. 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 No,
I,
it's
I,
funny.
I, I
If you,
question that sense
I,
of terroir.
well, I know you've heard of Zach Bush, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah,
But I mean, I just was listening to something and he was talking about how, you know, we aren't we aren't ourselves. Like our mind and our nervous system isn't something that comes from our brain. It actually comes from like the microbes in our guts that are
right.
like producing the serotonin and the signals that our brain uses. Like they are playing the keyboard. Like the brain is just the keyboard, but the microbes are actually typing the keys and writing the script of your life. I feel like there's something like that. I mean, maybe that's a very oversimplified metaphor analogy, but
It's
I'm
a
sure
sim.
it's something similar in the soil where it's
I
like,
think it's a similar like question. Like maybe the
yeah,
microbes are just maybe I wonder if the microbes decide what the peanut tastes like.
yeah,
So this is where it's I think it's very symbiotic, and I don't like I like that Zach Bush analogy, but I also think that there's got to be more back and forth. Like
yeah,
it's not a one way street. You know, we also determine the microbial balance in our gut because of
right,
the things
right,
that we're eating. So it's we also have
an
power over
influence.
them. It's back
Yeah,
and forth, and I think that the Pinot Noir needs X, Y, and Z, and then there's all these microbes underground that are giving it X, Y, Z, and then ABC, and maybe it doesn't have enough of one or two of the things. I don't know. I'm wondering if the microbes force the extra minerals into the plant because that's what the plant needs, or if the plant pulls. It's. I'm having a real. This is a really good question for me to think about for a long time.
yeah, and I mean, I think the use of the word terroir is has stunted our understanding of wine. Honestly, I'm just going to make that statement right now. I
Okay.
think we need to make that a question, like, and that's why I brought it up to you. I've just been thinking a lot about it, and you seem like the perfect person to pose this question to. That I just think it's become too vague at this point. It's sort of like using the term God. It's like, well, who's God, and what do you like? Is that God with a little G, capital G? And it depends on, what I mean. It has become an answer when it should still be a question. And I think with terroir, I'm now talking about in both cases, but um, yeah, it's just like I just started thinking about that recently, where it's just like the things that you're sort of struggling with in audibly that I'm listening to are the things I think are implicit in this, the fact that we've oversimplified things, and there's still so many things to sort of wrestle with about that I think don't explain it isn't easily explained by the term terroir. And it's, again, I'm going back to like,
I
what are we really trying to do, and why it has something to do with letting nature express itself with as little human overt manipulation. I mean, obviously, we have created this culture that involves shepherding this whole experience into a drinkable, delicious thing form. but what that is that we're doing, like what we're trying to express, is not, it's something more than terroir, or it's something that's deeper than terroir, I would say. And I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like,
I
and why it's important for that experience to, for so many of us, like why we're realizing it's how little we can touch that is important. um too.
have you been paying attention to the the LA wine project that Abe Schoner's doing with
Yeah,
some abandoned vineyards here?
I think, I mean, I was just telling Abe that he should get that vineyard, the Lone Wolf Vineyard, certified as a UNICEF heritage site. Like,
Totally.
um, I
And
mean, just seeing what it has done over the years, it's like there's basically like multiple species of vines now by virtue of being left alone
yeah,
and
and
letting
letting them
evolution take
propagate
place.
by seed.
Right, letting it
How
probably,
amazing.
yeah, and by what we call layering or provenage, or like the French have like 10 words for when the vine goes into the earth and
And
roots itself and then comes
right.
back out again. That sort
That's
of
that
like superorganism of a vineyard, basically.
that's it. And I think I said something to you like this some other time, but the real problem with a vineyard, the number one issue with a vineyard is the concept of a vineyard, right?
Right,
We didn't. That's not at all how these plants evolved, and they never like no grape evolved to be in a monoculture, right? And
right.
almost all the vineyards are these big monocultures. That's why like multiple species cover crops are so popular. You're starting to reintroduce this biodiversity that the plants have all evolved with, and we've in the last 200 or 300 years we've really pulled all the biodiversity away from them and then tried to make them exist in a glass vial or in a just by themselves as a experiment. But it's not the way that these plants grew or evolved. Or if you want to make a terrific Pinot Noir, let those Pinot Noir vines grow and propagate the way they would in in a natural setting, which I don't even know what
Yeah.
that looks like anymore. I guess it's climbing up redwood trees.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, we use, I'm just throwing back the concept of terroir. We use that for vineyards that are imported vines that are irrigated. And to me, that's absurd. Like, there is no terroir at that point. Like, this is not a native species, and it is not using the natural resources where it's grown. So it's, why are you even trying to talk about terroir, like in that sense at that
Right,
point? Like, unless you're dry farming native vines, what's terroir? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying you can't make a beautiful, wonderful vine, but let's, like, you can't use the same concept for, so like a native vine, or something like the Lone Wolf Vineyard, where, you know, transplanted vines, imported vines have now gone wild and sown things that have adapted and become native, um, that are dry farmed, have never been touched, basically. That's terroir. Like
right.
that, I think you could start talking about terroir. But the huge monocultures of Napa, that are irrigated and imported vines and species, it's like, well,
Right.
great. I mean, you make delicious wine, but stop talking about terroir.
I maybe this is when I talk about terroir, I almost never I'm almost never referencing a New World wine.
uh
And I can't recall the last time I was talking about a New World wine, and I talked about terroir. That
Mm,
really is a term that I almost reserve for European wines and European wines of a place and style.
right.
Um, and then it has more, and then it has a little more application, but even then, it's still this nebulous term that doesn't have any. I do you know Peter Vader Malberg? Um, Peter's Austrian producer,
Sounds
architect
really familiar.
originally. His wines are rather pricey, but they're worth seeking out. He is the first Austrian that I ever met that talked specifically about microbes. And when
Mm,
I was there about 7 or 8 years with him. And if you taste his wines next to wines made 10 feet away, I'm trying to think of one of his neighbors. Um, oh, well, I'll come back to it. There's a family over there that's like their family tree must look like a fist. But I can't. I'm blocking the name.
sounds
Who
like a Oklahomaism. A family tree that looks like a fist.
just everybody's got the same last name for like two towns.
Right.
But
Right.
I'm totally blocking the name. Um, anyway, Peter's wines have life and texture that a lot of his contemporaries do not. And specifically talking about that texture and the life in his wines, he said, I used to think I was a winemaker, and then I realized I was really just a shepherd of vines. And then
Hmm.
he made wines for a few more years, and he said, and then I thought, then he realized I'm not a shepherd of vines, I'm a microbe farmer. And he said
Yeah.
he completely changed the way he worked. He went from he says now he doesn't mess with the vines at all. He just lets them be. He's a microbe farmer through and through, but what that does is pulls out all the all the loess and the silica and all of the microbes break down all of these minerals that give the plant more life and give the finished product this incredible texture. And like they're beautiful wines that last for decades. So,
Wow.
and he uses like when we were talking, he brought up terroir a couple times, and I think you said life force, and he said for him, the life force in his vineyard is his terroir, and
Yeah.
that may just, that gets back to the microbes.
Yeah. I should wrap this up with a question about just how people can find out more about what you're doing, support what you're doing, get some of the Vinocity selections.
Well, we have
Where do we
we have our website, vinocityselections.com, but that's direct to consumer for California and a couple other states that we can ship to. And then in New York and California, we're also distributors. So also find our website, and you can link with
great.
me or one of our salespeople there. We really
Super.
do have a rather small book. I think we're about 16, maybe 17 producers, but they're all farmed organic or better. We've got Troon up in the Applegate Valley in Southern Oregon, which is they're just like the most forward-thinking vineyard on that scale. They actually have a lot of land that they can do a lot of
Yeah.
really great work on. They're creating giant biodiverse swaths of their property that'll be
And
planted to native species. They're really pushing for regenerative organic certification. I think they're going to get it in the next couple of years. I'm
great.
very impressed with what they're doing. So it's really, my company only exists to support the producers and try to get their products to markets better. We're not perfect yet, but and we won't be perfect for 20 years, but we're going to make a damn solid effort to get there.
Well, it looks like, yeah, am I right in thinking you guys have the corner on the biodynamic market in the Applegate Valley as far as distribution goes?
I mean, I think that it is just Troon there that's biodynamic right now.
I thought you had another uh
Not
producer from
I don't
there.
have anybody from Applegate. I've got Beckham up in Willamette that I work with. They're farming biodynamically, but they're not certified through Demeter yet. Um, it's a family operation,
Oh,
and
did they? Oh, maybe did
they're
they get
amazing.
some grapes from? They
They
must
buy
get some grapes from
they
Applegate.
bought they buy some grapes from Troon.
Okay, that's what
And
it
actually,
is.
that's, I went up to see the Beckhams, and they told me about Troon years ago when Troon was
Going through
being
their new,
sold and going
yeah,
from conventional to what these guys are doing now, which is
yeah,
really forward thinking.
yeah, yeah. They're kind of doing like the Tobless Creek thing, where they are just taking the whole landscape as a holistic expression of, and wine is a is a part of it. I mean, is sort of the showpiece of that, but the whole thing is an organism. The whole
Yeah,
world that they are creating is a holistic unit. It is really beautiful what they're doing.
yeah, and that's our goal, is we find more and more producers working in that manner, or we find producers making terrific wine that are open to making the change. And I'd love to lead a producer from regular conventional agriculture through the process into something that's much more regenerative. Um, we've got a biodynamic guy in Italy, Poderi Erica, and they just stopped tilling 2 of their hectare, which is it's a little thing, but they only, this is the first time they've even considered it. And I have asked them for years if they'd consider stopping tilling, and they sent me an email this winter and said, "Hey, just so you know, to help support your carbon ambitions, we stopped tilling 2 hectare to see how it goes." And Quercia Grossa, another Tuscan producer of ours, is working. He's planting a new vineyard, which is going against that concept of vineyard as a bad thing. Although he's planting it with biochar that he's created from his cuttings. I got him on a biochar kick last year, and he's
Oh,
actually
that's great.
making good with his effort to sequester carbon in his vineyards. And we didn't even
Oh, I
talk
love it.
about biochar, alternative forms of energy, and carbon sequestration. So
Yeah.
this is just the wine company that we've been talking about, and some logistics. But there's also, to really create a working cellular unit in a biomimicry kind of idea. Um, we've got to have powerhouses. There's many other aspects of this
You've
carbon negative
seen
system that we haven't
I
even
hope
touched on.
you've seen the documentary The Need to Grow. It's narrated by Rosario Dawson, and it's got um, these power plants that are produce biochar as their byproduct.
Yes,
And yeah, you know what I'm talking about, and
I
they
don't,
and
but
electricity. Oh my
I
god, no! You
don't.
should see that documentary.
I
It's amazing.
It's been on my, I haven't seen it, and I know that there are people make that those power plants exist, and I've got a friend that helped finance one in the Netherlands, and
It's basically
it's
like a greenhouse that produces methane that fuels the furnace that creates the biochar, which also emits enough energy to create electricity. Like it's a soul. I mean, and it's all passive. It's like
right.
it's just a loop, and then the byproduct are these usable things like electricity and biochar for fertility and powering a whole city block from one of these little power plants.
Offline, let's.
Yeah,
I'll.
yeah,
Oh
totally.
well, no, that's the Rosario lesson. The need to
Yep,
grow. I'll check it
yep.
out. Yeah,
Um,
there are lots of power initiatives that I want to get involved with that can be applied to, farm settings, warehouse settings, like small microgrids that will start to, you know, allow people to rethink their connection to big business. I want people to
yeah.
rethink their connection to big business and start to think about their connection to Earth and themselves. And, it's a community based everything.
And this is maybe like my final question here will be sort of like a setup, but what can the average person do who cares about what you care about like I do and wants to promote it in their own way?
I just try to vote with, I mean, for us at home, not talking about work and Vinocity and how to create these systems. We just try to vote with our dollars. We
Yeah.
don't. We've kind of cut out buying new things. Try to repurpose and recycle and purchase used as often as possible. Um, and we make sure that our dollars are going to people that support what we support. So you know during this COVID inspired shutdown for the last year, we've had very little opportunity to go out and spend and like waste money on entertainment. So, but we do definitely direct every dollar to go back to a farmer. We spend just as much as we ever did at the farmer's market.
Yeah.
And that's it. We just try to
Love
keep
it.
our money from going to Jeff Bezos, and be smart about, if we are going to make a purchase from Amazon, like, is this something that we can get locally? And if we can, like,
Yeah.
let's walk to that store and get it.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, for me, this all Vinocity is really a effort to allow people to vote with their dollars for better products. And we want to
Well,
bring better products to the market so people can have good things to vote for.
I love that. Well, thanks, James. This has been great.
Thanks for,
I
thanks
know we
for the
could talk
time.
forever, so, so we'll end it here.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this interview, please leave a review on whatever app you're using to listen. It's a huge help, and I really appreciate it. As James mentioned, we vote with our dollars, and our consumer choices are one of the most effective ways to influence business and agriculture for the better. That's why I started this podcast, and that's why I started my winery, Centralis. I wanted to promote people who are farming in a way that improves life on planet Earth, rather than degrades it. You can support these farmers by shopping at vinocityselections.com, as well as by buying Centralis wines. All of our wines at Centralis are made from grapes that were grown organically or better. You can learn more and buy wine at vinocityselections.com. That's VINO cityselections.com, or at centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. It's an easy and delicious way to promote a cleaner, healthier, and more hopeful future for the planet. Thanks.